breach dams, and or alter water flow. Only when a threat to human health and safety exists. So it's important to know, and we'll get into this, that just beavers merely existing in an area is not a reason to trap them. They are protected in the fact that you can't just trap them to get rid of them unless there's a threat to human health and safety. And just be aware that breaching dams and altering water flow, such as installing a water flow device, requires approval from the local conservation commission, which we'll get into. So I know there's a lot on this slide, but I just wanted to show everyone what exactly the law states is a threat to human health and safety. So a beaver occupying a public water supply, flooding water wells, flooding septic systems, flooding driveways or roads, and also substantial property damage, such as flooding of a foundation or flooding of a home. So I just wanted to put these on the slides so people could kind of, visualize exactly what the law states as a threat. So beaver trapping season is from November 1st to April 15th. So during this time, you may not need to get involved as the Board of Health. So I've had trappers come to me, or not necessarily trappers, but I've had applicants, so a property owner, come to me and say, I want to trap beavers. Well, between November 1st and April 15th, licensed trappers can go and trap beavers without Board of Health intervention. However, some trappers will come to you because they want to use a CONIBEAR trap, which we'll get into, because CONIBEAR traps are otherwise illegal. So they are only allowed when an emergency permit is issued by the Board of Health. If the beaver dam is not on the applicant's property, they are required to get written consent from the property owner. So just keep in mind, sometimes applicants have come to me before and they've said, there's beavers on my neighbor's property. Can you tell them to trap them and get rid of them? No, it's the applicant, whoever's property is being affected, it's their responsibility to pay to get rid of the beavers and to apply for the beaver trapping permit. If they want to work something out with their neighbor, maybe they split the cost, or they split, however much the cost of trapping is going to be, that's not really our concern. And what do you do if the property owner says no, where the beavers exist? This has happened, and it's not really rare, to be honest. I did talk with the State Division of Fisheries and Wildlife, and they said that they didn't want me to quote them on this, but they were fairly positive that there is case law out there where a property owner did say no, and then they were eventually held liable for the damage that the beavers were causing. So if it's between two private residents in your community, I wouldn't necessarily get involved with that. If the issue is affecting city-owned or town-owned property, you may want to get your city attorney to get involved and send a letter to the property owner and maybe cite that case law and say, hey, we need to trap these beavers because they're about to cause flooding of this roadway. And as you can see, it does happen. I took some pictures of news articles from Belchertown and Framingham where there are some issues there. So a CONIBEAR versus a box or cage trap. So the two traps on the left-hand side, the box and cage trap and the Hancock or suitcase trap, those are legal traps that licensed trappers can use during trapping season. They do have to be checked every 24 hours. So, I'd hope that a trapper would check it sooner than that, but they have up to 24 hours to check them. So the beaver or muskrat will get trapped in one of these. There's kind of conflicting evidence of what trap is better versus the CONIBEAR or the box cage trap. I hate trapping in general, but these beavers, they do tend to panic and stress out. And a lot of trappers don't like using these traps because think about it, they have to pull this super angry, upset beaver out of a pond in a big box because they're alive when they go to get them. And relocating wildlife in Massachusetts is illegal, so these beavers are euthanized once they're pulled out of the water. The CONIBEAR trap, my experience, I have found that trappers tend to prefer these traps, and that's why they'll come to me even during trapping season, because they're essentially from what I understand, a mousetrap, which it's supposed to be more of an instant kill rather than, it's not a leg hold. It's not supposed to hold them underwater. It's supposed to be an instant death for them. So those are illegal unless they get an emergency Board of Health permit. But your role in the Board of Health is to receive and log the complaint, verify that it's outside of trapping season, because if it's during trapping season, you don't necessarily need to get involved. You want to advise the complainant to fill out the application and pay a fee if you have one. Conduct a site visit and confirm there is a threat to human health and safety, and take photos, because if you do end up denying the permit, you'll have to have, reason why. And even if you do issue the permit, you'll also want to have evidence in case somebody disagrees with you issuing that permit. If the applicant is requesting to breach the dam or install a flow device, you'll want to have your Conservation Commission involved. So do not issue the permit until they give you and the applicant, written or verbal approval that it's all set. And confirm the beavers are on the applicant's property. If not, you'll have to get written consent from the property owner. And if the Conservation Commission has signed off and approved the application, you can issue the 10-day permit. The work must be done within 10 days. So if the trapper says, yeah, I'll get to it in 30 days or so, well, then that's probably not considered an emergency. So at that point, you want to reevaluate whether or not you should be issuing the permit. These are supposed to be emergency 10-day permits. So they should be prioritizing that work almost immediately. So just a few notes that I wanted to put. You always want to confirm that there's an actual threat. The emergency permit is only valid for 10 days. If the problem affects the public water supply, then Mass DEP must handle the situation. And although it's not required, they do recommend that you advise the applicant that between June 1st and July 15th, the baby beavers are completely reliant on their mother. However, you still have the authority to grant the permit during this time period. And trapping and relocating wildlife is illegal in Massachusetts, and that's for all wildlife, not just beavers. So this was recently, I believe, where there was a lot of rain and a lot of flooding, and a beaver dam caused this huge road to be washed out in Belchertown. So trappers must be licensed annually with the Mass Division of Fisheries and Wildlife. They do not keep a public list of all of the trappers. I kind of wish they did, because I do like to confirm that each trapper is licensed. Similar to, Title V system inspector, I usually like to just cross-reference the new EPIC list and make sure that they're up to date on their licensing. But you can call the state and request and ask them if that trapper is currently licensed. Each trap must have a registered number, and property owners may trap on their own property without a license. So just like how property owners, single family owner occupied property owners can pull their own building permits, it's similar to that, where they can trap on their own property. So applicants can request to trap, breach the dam, and/or employ a non-lethal water flow device. Trapping and breaching dams is effective, but it's very short-term solution. You have to remember that when a trapper goes in to trap a colony of beavers, there may be up to 8 or 9 of them. It's not just a matter of trapping one beaver. So it can get pretty costly, because a lot of times the trappers will charge per beaver. And if you only trap half of the colony, then overnight, the other half of the colony will likely dam that water back up. So it can happen that quickly. So they'll want to trap the entire colony if they're gonna, utilize trapping. So they believe that it's a combination of the water flow sensation and the sound of running water that causes the beavers to want to run back and dam up the area. The flow devices, when I first started, they called them beaver deceivers. I don't know if that's a local company that says that or what, but you may also hear that language as well. They are placed through a beaver dam to allow the water to drain, and they're designed so that the beavers can't hear the running water, because when they can hear the running water, instinctually they go to try to find a way to stop that running water and dam up the area. So I love the idea of water flow devices, because otherwise you're going to have to trap those beavers every single year, because you can get rid of a colony, but it's likely that a new family of beavers is going to move in. So I love flow devices when they do work. They're not always successful, and they do require regular maintenance. So if this is happening on somebody else's property, you'd have to have them on board with maintaining it. So this is just another example of a flow device. You'll probably see these a lot. This fencing is put around culverts because beavers tend to like to block up culverts. I don't believe just putting this fencing up requires any Board of Health permitting, unless they're gonna maybe unclog the culvert if it was already dammed up or already blocked up. But just putting this fencing in, I'm not positive that would require Board of Health intervention. So, like I said, don't feel obligated to issue a permit for every complaint. You want to really do your due diligence and confirm that a threat to human health and safety is existing. I have had complainants. I had a vet in one of the towns I worked in wanted me to issue a beaver permit because he lived around wetlands, and the wetlands were just getting larger and larger every year. It was nowhere near flooding his house. He was on city sewer and city water, so there's no threat of it flooding his septic or well. So I didn't really see a reason to issue the permit. And I was surprised he didn't really know the law, being a vet. But and if you deny an application, you must put it in writing and specify the reasons that you denied it. They do have options after the initial denial. So they can appeal to the Department of Public Health if you determine there's not a threat to human health and safety. If you don't believe the problem is caused by a beaver, they can appeal to the Division of Fisheries and Wildlife. They can also appeal to the Division of Fisheries and Wildlife for any issues that are not considered a threat to human health and safety. And they can also contact a private contractor for assistance, such as the MSPCA. And they actually have grant opportunities, which I didn't know about this until I was digging a little deeper, for flow devices for towns and businesses in Western Mass. So if after the initial 10 days, the problem is not alleviated, they can apply for another 10-day permit. At that same time, they should also be applying with the Division of Fisheries and Wildlife for a 30-day permit, but you don't have to wait on the state for them to approve anything. You can issue another 10-day permit. If after 20 days, the issue still persists, you can no longer allow issuing a permit, but they can request another 10-day permit for breaching of the dam or a flow device. This is just a example application that I took from the last town I worked in, which I think I took from the last town I worked in. So it's made its way with me. On the application, you want to get the licensed trapper information and the complaint location. Figure out if it's entirely on their property, and if not, get the consent form, which we have an example of as well. You want to have the applicant explain why they think it's a threat to public health and safety, and then have them choose what they're doing. Are they going to trap and breach the dams? Are they just going to trap? If they're just going to trap, that doesn't really make sense, because if there's most likely there's a dam somewhere that needs to be breached. So it's typically going to be trapping and breaching. Or if they want to just breach a dam, which again is not super effective because the beavers will probably rebuild it in no time, or employing a non-lethal water flow device. And then this is just kind of a little bit of information of the law. And I always just note on there that options B and C, which was the flow device and breaching of the dam, requires the Conservation Commission to get involved. Consent form, this is just a really simple consent form that the property owner where the beavers exist are allowing the trapper to access their property to trap the beavers. And then here are some really great resources. This is really where I compiled a lot of my information up. Division of Fisheries and Wildlife, the MSPCA Beaver Flow Device Funding. MAHB also has a little segment in there. I think in their, I forget what it's called, their law book or whatever, specifically for the Board of Health's role, and then also a link directly to the law. And that's all that I have. So I don't know if there's any questions in the chat as of now, Phoebe.
Yes, Lauren Kennedy, do you want to ask your question? I'm not sure we'll know the answer, but. Well, might not be here. Her question was, do you have any idea why the state gave this responsibility to boards of health?
I figure it's one of those instances where the state doesn't know who to give it to, so they give it to the Board of Health, which happens, I felt like, with the most recent sewer overflow permitting that we have to get involved with now. I think it's just a matter of they didn't know who else to give the responsibility to, but it's a good point. I would assume most likely because the flooding of septic systems and wells and stuff is a public health issue.
All right. Next question is from Bethany Yates. Can a public works department trap themselves on city-owned property, or do they need to hire a trapper?
That's a good point. I would say probably not, because I don't think the DPW is considered a property owner.
Okay.
They're working on behalf of the city, but I wouldn't consider them the owner of the city. So no, and we have had our DPW request permits plenty of times, and they hire a professional.
Thanks. All right. Another question is, do you have any examples of situations where you've denied an application from the town's public works or other DPW issues?
I have not denied a permit from the DPW. I have issued permits for them because they had some flooding of over near they had some monitoring wells near the transfer station or their closed landfill. But no, I mean those situations can get uncomfortable because you're working with your own colleagues there, but I feel fairly strongly about not issuing permits unless there's really a hazard or a public health issue, because just because beavers exist, they don't necessarily deserve to die. So I am pretty strict about making sure that there's truly an issue.
Next question is about whether these forms can be online to be shared, and we will mail these slides to everybody who registered. And the other is, do you have any template letters for denying a permit on the basis of it being a non-emergency that maybe you could add to the slideshow?
I don't, but I could probably whip something up as an example template. So I could do that, and then we could email it out to this list. But the application that I did share is from the city of East Hampton. So I actually took it right from their website. So if you go onto the city of East Hampton's website, you can get an example of the consent form and the application. And I can also send it. I took all of those with me when I left East Hampton, so I can also send you the Word document as well. Who's
Great,
question?
that would be great. Let's send that in the packet that Liz can send that out to everybody who registered, and we can also put it on the page for this. We can put it on a page on our website too. So if later on you lose the email or you want to tell somebody about it, we'll tell you where you'll be able to find it. Matt is asking whether we mentioned Concom approval for dam breaching. Yes, we did. Does anybody who has had experience with that want to speak to what that process looks like? Jim does. Yes.
Hi, I'm Jim Philbrook, the health director of town of Charlton. We had an issue with the town of Southbridge. The road, Gulfwood Road, that enters from Southbridge into Charlton, had beavers, and the beavers were on the Southbridge side, but it affected the Charlton side. And to this day, the road is now fallen into under the water, and that road is no longer usable. So municipalities need to work together. DPW cannot. They can actually take a culvert and clean it, but they need to go to conservation first, regardless. And also, they have to hire a licensed trapper no matter what. I have had ad hoc groups from Boston follow me around when I issue permits to make sure that I'm doing it. And it, like they mentioned earlier, that you just don't issue a permit to kill beavers unless it's a necessity. And I don't do that. If it's a risk to public safety, someone's septic, a public way, right away, then I would, and I do that. In Charlton, we have lots of water issues, so you need to work together, and you need to make sure your paperwork is done right. Otherwise, you can find yourself in trouble.
Thank you. And Matt wanted to speak. Yeah, go ahead. Matt Fortier.
Hello. Can you all hear me?
Lots of background noise, but yes.
Okay. All right. So on Town of Orange application, if you're going to do either option B or C. We just have an asterisk that you need CONCOM approval to breach a dam, alter a wetlands, or use water flow leveling devices. So we would never issue the permit for those options without first getting the approval from CONCOM. It's just reference from Mass General Law, Chapter 131, Section 80A, and Section 40. That's all I have on that.
All right, thanks.
There's a question in the chat from Lisa. If the dam is in one town and the public health threat is in another, which Board of Health is in charge? Typically, it's where the threat is. That's been my experience. So say there's a threat in the town of Southampton, but the dam is in West Hampton, then the applicant would apply to the Southampton Board of Health because that's where the threat is, and they'd have to get the property owner in West Hampton. So it's always it's whoever's property is being affected is who has to apply for it. So if my property is flooding and the beavers are on my neighbor's property, it's not my neighbor's responsibility to trap the beavers. It's my responsibility to trap them, pay for it, apply for it. I just have to get my neighbor's approval. If you want to, I've seen some neighbors, just all split it because it's kind of affecting everybody's property and they'll split the cost. But whoever's applying to relieve the issue, it's going to be their responsibility. So I believe it would be the Board of Health where the threat is.
And there's one more question in here about flooding agricultural land and that is a CONCOM exception. Does the Board of Health need to be involved there, or is that an acceptable reason to trap without a Board of Health permit?
So if it's during the trapping season, we don't have to get involved at all. If it's outside of the trapping season or they want to use the CONIBEAR trap, then we always need to issue a permit. But I believe if I pull back up the slide with the law, it does say flooding of or access to commercial agricultural lands, which prevents normal agricultural practices from being conducted. Reduction in the production of agricultural crops. So it was the last bullet of that slide. It does mention agricultural fields.
Okay.
Oh, I do want to mention too, I was reading up on this today. Just if the flooding is affecting somebody's lawn, that's not considered a public health threat. Just kind of the aesthetic, because that's kind of that situation of where that vet asked for a permit. It was kind of encroaching on his lawn. It was not affecting any wells or septic systems or his house or anything like that. So just the aesthetic of having a wetland in your backyard does not constitute issuing a permit.
There are no other questions in the chat, and I don't know whether if anybody wanted to speak more to what the working, or you, Bree, wanted to speak more to what the working with the CONCOM on the issue is like, what they're going to look at, or if anyone is, I think we may have a few Conservation Commission members on here, but if anybody wants to add anything to what happens when the Board of Health refers it to the CONCOM.
I've always sent, I've always had great relationships with our conservation agent or our commission, and I've just sent them, I'll usually scan the application and put it on their radar, but the applicant should also apply directly to the Conservation Commission. I don't think it's your responsibility in the health department to, request to be on the agenda or anything. The applicant should do that, but, I always give my conservation a heads up. And I've never had an issue with conservation denying anything. If they were to deny it, that's a really good question because I haven't dealt with that. They usually have always approved it. From what I understand, they want to avoid having, a massive, they don't want to cause any more additional flooding because you have to remember some of these dams are pretty extensive and they're, helping with, they're helping, what is the word I'm trying to say? they're trying to make it so it's not flooding. So if they go and breach this really extensive dam, they don't want to cause any issues downstream.
Donna had a good question. Can you speak more to the site inspection and verifying the location and owner and damage? And have you ever accepted pictures from the applicant?
I typically don't go off of pictures. I like to go in person. So similar to, housing inspection, I always say I can't go on anyone else's property, but if I can see it from your property. So I would go to, wherever they're saying the issue is. And I would go in person just to confirm that it's happening at that time. Same thing with housing. we can't really accept photos. We have to kind of observe it ourselves.
And for the property lines, you do that, your research yourself?
Property lines. Yeah, I mean, typically it's pretty obvious it's not on their property. But, at that point I might contact the neighboring property and ask them, is this on your property? And kind of gauge where they're at with allowing the trapping. But like Jim was saying, not everybody is going to be super gung-ho about trapping beavers. I've had property owners that were like, absolutely not. So those are really interesting situations, and it really becomes a civil matter between the two private residents. I don't really think it becomes the health department's, I don't think you really need to get involved in the middle of that unless it's city property. And then at that point, either, your city attorney or somebody would go from there.
Thanks. Next question is from Jasmine about what about mosquitoes in wetlands, and would that constitute a public health concern?
That's a good question. That's not explicitly in the law. And from what I gathered, I'd have to look again. I don't think that the law says anywhere in there or what the Board of Health may constitute as a threat. Which is kind of nice, because when the law does that, residents will push us a little bit more because they think it's a public health threat. I can review the login, but I'm pretty sure it's just those bullet points, and I can bring those up again if that's helpful. See if that will work this time. Can you see the law?
Yep, perfect.
Okay. So that's, I don't think anything in there about mosquitoes, but that's a good point. That's definitely a public health nuisance, but I don't know if it is enough to get rid of the beavers.
This was a pre-climate change and dangerous mosquito law.
Yes, this was 2000. So
okay, let's see. I do not see any other questions in the chat, except a lot of people really hoping to get the stuff a packet sent to them. Oh, I lie. Stacy Lane, would you issue a permit for flooding on a municipal airport if other runways are available?
yeah, it says right there. Oh, if other ones are available. I mean, if they use that runway, then probably yes. I mean, if it's one runway that the entire airport would all agree that they don't use that one area. But yeah, and if you look at bullet point D, it does say airport runway. So yeah, I would ask them if they use that. That's a good question. If the airport can get by without it, but I don't know how that works. If they're saying they need it, then they need it, and you'd have to issue the permit.
Great. And also Deb Vondahl from Athol has offered to send the letter when the original law came into effect with the template letter back from the Board of Health. So we'll send that out to everybody.
Yeah.
Okay. If you haven't had your question in the chat and you don't want to, but you want to raise your hand or unmute and ask, you can do that too. But there is nothing left in here. And people are asking, will the recording be available? Yes, we will record it and send the link to where it will be, and if anybody, and in the same follow-up packet. All right.
And thank you. I hope you guys join us for our next training is on food truck permitting. We're also going to be joined by a fire prevention captain from another city who's going to kind of go over his side of the inspection process. And then in June, we're going to talk about plumbing requirements in the food code. They're not super clear to me. So we'll have a plumbing inspector there for that one as well. And those are in the Western Mass Public Health Association newsletter. They're also on our website, but they are linked in this slide as well. So we will send these slides out and it'll be in there as well.
All right. The question was one person just asking the dates of the other ones.
Yeah, I can get back to right here.
To that.
So Thursday, June 8th is the plumbing and the food code, and the food truck permitting is Wednesday, May 17th.
And we look forward to seeing you then.
Yep. All righty. Thank you.
Everyone.